Right now. This sounds like an after-action critique. But there's one line here that quietly changes the stakes. It's not just they went back. It's that they let a crime scene go, and then had to return. I'm sticking to what was said, then what it implies. 2 chapters. Process first, then the psychology. Beat. Because in a kidnapping case, minutes don't just matter, they compound. Slow down here, this isn't movie logic. This is procedure, and procedure is where cases live or die. Here's how to watch this segment. Listen for what they admit, then listen for what they say should have happened, and finally, listen for who controls the timeline. Beat. Setup. The show opens with a blunt question. It's not subtle. News. Verbatim. Hindsight is 20/20, but does it really require hindsight to know a crime scene must be processed correctly as soon as possible? Does it really require hindsight to know time is of the essence in a kidnapping case? So what? That's not a vibe. That's an accusation. It frames this as preventable, not mysterious. That's why this matters at home. Specific promise loop. In 20 seconds, listen for who admits the misstep. Beat. Setup. Here's the admission. And it's clean. News verbatim. The sheriff of Pima County, Chris Nanos, acknowledged his department released Guthrie's home as a crime scene too soon, only to have to return days later. So what? That's a workflow break. And breaks like that create doubt that never leaves. Not because of drama, because of contamination risk. Specific promise. Loop. Next, listen for the one sentence about FBI help. Beat. Setup. This next part sounds like a public service announcement. It isn't. News verbatim. And by the way, the FBI does not only work high-profile cases, they will actually provide assistance in any case, but you have to ask. So what? That's a power process clue. Help exists, but the trigger is a request. Watch who makes that call and when. Specific promise. Loop. In the next 30 seconds, listen for the phrase one chance. Beat. Setup. Now the guest lands the emotional reality. News. Verbatim. I like cops. They have really hard jobs, but you only get one chance to do something for the first time, like search a home right after a crime. So what? That's the human truth in plain English. You can revisit a scene, you can't rewind it. Specific promise loop. Next, compare that to what the deputy saw. Beat. Who's speaking here, and why does that matter? You've got an anchor framing it as obvious, and you've got a retired FBI agent backing the critique. Beat. What was the case treated as at first? News verbatim. I think the problem was initially that it was a missing persons case. So what? That explains the early posture. Not excuses it, explains it. Promise loop. In 15 seconds, listen for the blood moment. Beat. When does this shift from missing to crime scene? News verbatim. However, once that sheriff's deputy saw that blood, it should have been, we're shutting it down, everybody out, don't touch anything, etc. So what? That's the pivot point. That's the line that defines competence in hindsight, or without it. That's the part people feel, not just read. Promise loop. Watch who she contrasts next. FBI versus local protocols. Beat. How do agencies differ, and what does that do to evidence? News verbatim. Some law enforcement agencies have a different set of protocols than the FBI does. So what? Different protocols means different margins for error. And in kidnapping timelines, margins become consequences. Promise loop. Next, listen for the warrant and the car. Beat. Setup. Here's the power process angle. It's not TV, it's paperwork. News verbatim. Because when the FBI comes on, we want to look at the warrant. What's in the warrant? The warrant probably said, yes, search the entire residence, the curtilage, any outbuildings, any vehicles, and you know the drill. So what? This is timeline control. A warrant defines the map of the hunt, and it can widen fast once a new team arrives. Specific promise loop. In 20 seconds, listen for the line about the car, back here. Beat. Setup. Now comes a contradiction moment. What was treated as relevant? News, verbatim. And then when they said, "Did you guys already process this car? How did it get back here?" And they said, "No, well, we didn't think it was part of it." So what? That's the friction point between assumptions and procedure. That sounds reassuring, but here's the risk. If something wasn't part of it yesterday, it can be central tonight. Specific promise loop. Next, the anchor pivots to ransom reality. Listen for not common. Beat. Setup. The segment widens. It goes from scene work to outcome odds. News verbatim. Ransom notes are actually not common in modern-day kidnappings. So what? That's a reality check for viewers, and it resets expectations for how this plays out. Specific promise loop. In 30 seconds, listen for the blunt line. They're not good. Beat. One step at a time. Here's what this signals based on what they said. The segment is built to make you feel two things at once: sympathy for really hard jobs and impatience with preventable mistakes. Beat. News. Verbatim. I like cops. They have really hard jobs, but you only get one chance to do something for the first time. So what? That's not anti-cop. That's anti-sloppy. And the audience reaction is predictable. If the stakes are life and death, viewers demand perfection. Then comes the institutional tell. News. Verbatim. The FBI does not only work high-profile cases, they will actually provide assistance in any case, but you have to ask, so what? No spin, just the record and the incentives. The ask line suggests a system where escalation is optional. Optional escalation creates uneven outcomes across counties. That's not a claim about this case's ending. It's an observation about process, grounded in what was said. Beat. And the retired agent keeps it real about criminal competence. News. Verbatim. No, they're not good at avoiding apprehension. So what? That line is designed to calm the viewer, but it also raises the pressure on the early hours. If offenders aren't that good, then errors at the scene hurt more, because the advantage should be with investigators, unless the timeline gets away from them. Specific promise loop. Before we finish, watch the single word that jumped out. Beat. Quickly, zoom out to incentives and everyday impact. Institutionally, this segment is about protocol versus improvisation. News verbatim. We have, as I said, very strict protocols that we do not deviate from at all. So what? Strict protocols are trust architecture. They're how agencies defend decisions later, internally, and in court. Beat. For the public, the human impact isn't abstract. In kidnapping coverage, people mentally place themselves in it. What would you want if it were your family member? You'd want shutting it down. You'd want don't touch anything. Because that's the difference between a clean trail and a compromised one. That's why this matters at home. Beat. And there's a why now embedded in the guest's approach. They're not waiting to profile later. They're reading language cues early. News, verbatim. It's much more of a practice now to do it early on because they can be so impactful. So what? That suggests a modern urgency. Analysis now, not after regret, and it sets up the late pivot. One word, one tell. Specific promise. Loop. In 10 seconds, listen for Dear Samantha. Beat. Before we move on, stop here. This is where it flips. News. Verbatim. This last one is addressed, Dear Samantha, not to anybody else. So what? One word can signal tone, and tone can signal intent, not proof, signal. Beat. So here's what to watch next. Not the commentary. The follow-through. Do they ask for federal help early? Do they lock down strict protocols the moment evidence appears? And do they treat every potential piece, like that car, as part of it before it's too late? Beat. Final question for you, because it goes to trust. What matters more here, the early crime scene decision, or the later corrections? Drop your answer and tell me why.